Hello everyone, my name is Vrinda Raghavan, and today I'll be talking about antecedent-based interventions. So throughout this course, we learned many different evidence-based interventions, and this is one of my personal choices, mainly as it focuses on changing the environment to prevent a behavior from happening or teaching the lagging skills to do the same. So in this presentation, we are going to talk about what we mean by antecedent-based interventions, how we know that these are established interventions, how do we implement them, discussing an article on antecedent intervention, and then I will be talking a little bit about how I use antecedent strategies in my workplace. All right, so let's talk about the what. So antecedent-based interventions are an evidence-based practice that involve using environmental modifications to change the conditions in the setting that previously prompted a learner with ESD to engage in interfering behaviors. So what are antecedents? Antecedents are something that occur before a behavior. So that's either present in the environment, in the setting, or is a stimulus, an instruction. It can be anything that occurs before a behavior. So let's talk about this example. Little Tommy throws a tantrum every time his mother says he cannot watch TV or play on the iPad at this very moment. So Tommy throws a tantrum every time he sees TV. What can we do? The antecedent here looks like the TV present in the room. So the simplest thing that we can do is putting a not available sign or maybe a cross on the TV. So this is telling Tommy when he enters the room that the TV is not an option right now. So it helps in eliminating or preventing interfering behaviors by removing the triggers in the environment, adding more prompts, and focusing on motivating operations. So it also provides opportunities to display replacement behaviors. So when we talk about antecedent strategies, it does not just have to be antecedent-based. It can either be used alone in isolation or in combination as treatment packages. So in our treatment package, we can use antecedent strategies along with consequence strategies like high reinforcement or extinction. So that will be termed as a treatment package. So let's move on. How do we know that it is an established intervention? So the National Standard Project Phase 2 talks about how we have a lot of studies that use antecedent interventions. Now, in this project, they review all the articles and they see how many articles actually, the interventions are favorable towards change in behaviors. And then they categorize them under established, emerging, or unestablished. So for having like an intervention under the established category, they need a certain number of studies that have shown a favorable increase in behaviors using that particular intervention. So in the National Standard Project Phase 1, the behavioral package and the antecedent package were two different interventions. But in the Phase 2, they have combined those two under behavioral interventions. They have also noted the behaviors that they have seen increase are academic behaviors, communication, interpersonal, learning readiness, personal responsibility, play, and self-regulation. Behaviors that they saw decreased were sensory emotional regulations, problem behaviors, restricted, repetitive, non-functional patterns of behaviors, which we sometimes call it self-stimulatory behaviors. So this is how we know that antecedent interventions are an established intervention, and maybe it should be used more often. Now, how? So we are talking about how an antecedent-based intervention can be implemented. The most formal way would be to conduct a structural analysis. Now, how do we conduct a structural analysis is the easiest way will be to use an ABC data sheet where we are taking data about what occurred just before the behavior, what behavior are we targeting, and what was the consequence. So when we use an ABC data sheet, we see the same antecedents recurring. So we know that this particular antecedent is what probably is triggering the behavior. So once the antecedent is identified, an intervention is developed, which is uniquely relevant to the individual, because like for each individual, it's going to be a different antecedent and a different modification required to that antecedent. So let's talk a little bit about how a functional analysis is different from a structural analysis. In a functional analysis, we focus mainly on understanding the function of the behavior that's maintained. So we talk about the 4 functions. In structural analysis, we talk about the antecedents. So basically, we only talk about what occurred before a behavior and how we can change it so we see a reduction in that behavior. So a structural analysis specifically presents and withdraws targeted antecedents while consistently maintaining the consequence. So moving on to the next one. So this is from the text Behavior Analysis for a Lasting Change, and it talks about the many antecedent methods. These are some things that we really use more often. So let's talk about redirection. It basically means interrupting inappropriate and prompting more acceptable alternative behaviors. The next one is distracting with a preferred event, where we distract the individual by providing reinforcing events in advance of the transition. The next one is behavioral momentum. It's one of my personal favorites. It's basically a program behavior known to produce high rates of compliance. How we do that is we present a number of high preferred activities before presenting a low preferred task. So when we start the momentum of complying, and then we add in a low preferred activity so we see more compliance. So that was behavioral momentum. The next one is reducing response effort. This basically means reducing the demands and then slowly, gradually, increasing demands. But to begin with, we reduce the response effort. The next one is applying non-contingent reinforcement. It basically means presenting reinforcers on a fixed time interval, whether or not a behavior occurs. So we are just reinforcing. Reinforcements have always seemed to increase compliance. So we do that. The next one is modeling appropriate behaviors for replacement. Basically means that we demonstrate the appropriate replacement behaviors. There are times where the kids do not know what to do, how to do it, so we just model it to them and show them this is what's expected. So the next one is activity schedule, where we just specify in words or maybe a picture, like visual display of what is to be expected next. So like a daily sequence of activities. Okay, you come in the morning, you do bell work, then you have snack. We do movement. So if it's all in pictures, the child knows what to expect. The next one is social stories. It's basically stories containing brief episodes consisting of one concept per page, written in first person and designed to provide the children with answers to questions of the who, what, when, where, and why of a given situation. So it basically tells them what is going on, what am I supposed to do, and when. So that is social stories. Social skills training is teaching socially acceptable behaviors that will be naturally recognized and accepted. So we are teaching them how to use social skills like turn taking. Okay, it's my turn. So we are cueing, prompting that this is the appropriate way to do things. The last one is functional communication training, which is extremely important for the early intervention category because we see a lot of problem behaviors because a child is unable to communicate his needs, and that's why we see a lot of problem behaviors. And if you just teach a child how to ask for something using a break card or a cue card, I need a blank, so the child can fill it in. So some form of communication, we do see a reduction in problem behaviors. So these are all antecedent methods of interventions which can be used to reduce problem behaviors, like before they occur. So some of them are also some lagging skills that can be taught to them. So all right, here I am going into the article that I chose for this presentation. It's called The Use of Structural Analysis to Develop Antecedent-Based Intervention for Students with Autism. I found this article on our university library. I just had to type in antecedent interventions autism, and this was probably like the first article that came up. So in this article, they did use a multiple baseline design, and there were 3 participants. The inclusion criteria for the participants were they were all of the same grade level. They had a diagnosis of ASD or at least were eligible for special education services, at least half a day in general education setting. And this study utilizes practitioner-implemented structural analysis. In this case, it was the teachers who were doing a structural analysis within school settings to determine antecedent variables affecting prosocial behaviors of students with autism. And once the teachers identified antecedents, they were combined into intervention packages and assessed utilizing a multiple baseline design across settings. All right, let's see more about this. So there were 3 participants, as we mentioned, Jason, Nigel, and Caleb. They were all about the same age. Jason had a PGD and OS diagnosis, whereas Nigel and Caleb did not have a formal diagnosis, but they were eligible for special education services. They were also in a general ed classroom for more than 50%, as were the inclusion criteria. Now, there were 3 conditions identified by the teachers for each of the participant, and then there were behaviors identified, which then worked as the dependent variables. So for each of the conditions identified by the teachers, there was a baseline data taken, a structural analysis was conducted, and depending on the structural analysis, the antecedents that were identified were modified, and an intervention phase was implemented wherein the data was taken, and then they were compared to the data taken from the typical peers in the classroom. So there were 3 conditions. Each condition had 3 phases: a baseline phase, a structural analysis phase, and an intervention phase. So let's see. Okay, this is exactly what I just spoke about. Let's see the examples. So for Jason, baseline data was taken in a large group setting for engagement levels. Using the structural analysis, the teachers were able to identify specific factors that were contributing to the engagement levels. And then the factors were modified in the intervention phase and data was taken. So similarly, for all the 3 participants, there were 3 conditions identified along with 3 target behaviors. So for each condition, data was taken across all 3 dependent variables. Now the results. The results of the study show that there was an increase in appropriate behaviors. Increase in the mean engagement levels are seen in the table below, where we see a baseline for large group instruction, a baseline for small group reading, and a baseline for independent seek work. We see that there is an increase in each of the phases. Like for Jason, the baseline large group instruction was 84%, and the intervention was 98. Similarly, for small group, it was 81, which increased to 95 after the antecedent intervention was implemented. So similarly, for all these 3 participants, we see an increase. And these percentages were compared to the peers, which is the last column on the right. So we do see that the results show us that when a structural analysis was conducted and the antecedents were identified, they were modified uniquely relevant to each individual. There is an increase in appropriate behaviors. Now coming to the discussion. So a recent analysis indicated that the majority of interventions demonstrating evidence for addressing behavior challenges for individuals with ASD in the classroom are based on antecedent manipulations in changing instructional contexts. So what I have read so far and what I understand is it is extremely difficult for teachers or practitioners to conduct functional analyses in classroom settings or in a school setting. Therefore, structural analysis is way easier and also accurate to use in a school or a classroom setting. So that's exactly the second point here, where Jason's teacher was able to identify that variables such as teacher proximity had a significant impact on his prosocial and interaction behaviors. The process of structural analysis was simpler in execution and interpretation for his teacher. Coming to the limitations of the study, it's basically consistent with implementation of single subject designs, the generalization and the homogeneity, which means since they are single subject designs, how effective is the generalization to other participants? Or homogeneity basically means when you're including children with the same gender, same age group, how do we take it beyond this and apply it to another population, maybe of a different age or different gender. That was the article that I reviewed. Now this slide is talking about antecedent strategies in my workplace. Now, I work in a classroom with 14 children. Most of them have either an ASD or an ODD diagnosis. So some antecedent strategies that I use in my workplace are changes to physical environment, where we do label everything using pictures and words. We have visual cues in every part of the classroom where the children know where things go, what they are expected to do. So they do have like a visual activity schedule, which increases predictability. That's my second bullet point. So they know where to look for their schedule. We have color-coded areas of work. So the green is technology. So you are now in technology. After technology is a yellow. Yellow is independent work. So it basically increases predictability. The next one is pre-activity preparation, where we use time warnings, morning meetings to tell the kids what to expect. Visual supports, picture cues, activity schedules we spoke about earlier, providing choices proactively, so giving weighted choices. So would you like to use a crayon or a marker? I mean, it's absolutely fine they don't want to use a pencil. So giving them weighted choices. And social narratives, we do have dry erase boards in every part of the classroom where we just get a dry erase board and a marker and we write out social narratives that, okay, a child is perseverating on going outside. So I'd write, it is very cold outside, we are going to play inside in the classroom, something like that. And then modifying presentation of demands, we do have different levels of learners in our classroom, so highlighting answers for a lower learner, lower level. So we do understand that it's going to be too high a demand for that child, so we do break it down. The last one is sensory exercise breaks. We do a lot of movement breaks and weighted ball walks where the children individually, one-on-one, go with the teacher to get their energy out, so which is really helpful in a classroom setting, which can be really overstimulating sometimes. So these are some antecedent strategies in my workplace. And the last slide is the references. These are all the references I used to make this presentation. I hope I was able to put across the basics of antecedent-based interventions, and I hope the article that I used put a little weight on the same. So thank you very much.